Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Keys to AWS Optimization. Today, we're going to be talking all about how Amazon Q can help optimize your infrastructure as code. If you don't know what Amazon Q or infrastructure as code is, do not worry. We'll be diving into those topics. And with me today is John to help do this, who's whipped up a very cool demo. And as in most of the shows recently, people are demoing cool stuff, and they've made it so quickly using things like Amazon Q. So we'll get into that. As always, feel free to put comments, questions in the chat, and we'll try and help you as much as we possibly can. But we'll always start off with our normal question. John, have you had a frugal week or a splurgy week?
I think this week was a little bit frugal. We've got our oldest son who's away with his grandparents this week. So one less head in the house is just making it frugal by default, which is good. How about yourself?
Very frugal. I feel like I went camping for the last few days. So out exploring, very kind of minimalist cooking. We were just very much like, right, we're gonna get a can of like butter beans and like some veg, and that's it. And we're just gonna do some of that. So
All right.
it's very fun.
I was going to say, do you have whiplash right now from going from, being in the woods camping to the world of AI within like a matter of hours? I mean, that's a pretty, the pendulum is swinging, back and forth.
Yeah, I did like have to be like, okay, back into work mode. I did think I was like, oh, I better go on like camera in a bit. But then I'm like leaving this and I'm going to see a comedy show after. So very much like waking up to the sound of birds to then being talking about AI, which is like the pendulum I love. Swing. Someone said, geez, hope you had some M&Ms. Of course, it's my sustenance. I must have my daily M&Ms. We've had a lot of M&M chat. Yeah, exactly. Get some trail mix going. And this guy's put, John's put, this show is awesome. Thank you, John. We love to hear it. Right. Wait, what are butter beans? Do you guys not have butter beans in the States? It's a big white bean. They're like bigger than cannelloni beans. Does that ring a bell? John, I'm like speaking.
I think maybe in childhood we use those to like count things out, in school when we were learning to count with beans and stuff. But I don't know if that's a meal staple, Not
okay. So we have them in the States. I love this person's just like, we do, don't worry, Steph. Like these people just don't know. Fair enough, because you guys are big. Maybe some parts of the States, maybe you don't. But let's get into today's show. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Steph Gooch. I'm a senior SA advocate here to help you on your FinOps journey. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is John Massey, and I'm a principal optimization solutions architect on the optics team. Been at AWS and working with cost efficiency with, some of our largest customers for about 5 years now. Happy to be on the show, Steph. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's get into what we're going to be talking about, which is, as we have seen quite a lot recently, we did a two-parter on using Amazon Q to make a solution. If you see me on my other show about Amazon Q, we've done a lot of stuff recently. But of course, this is an optimization show. So I wanted to highlight the power of Q in optimizing your infrastructure as code, because a lot of the times the workloads people have are huge. There's so many files. You don't want to manually go through and find all the ways to optimize, nor might you not even know all the little ways that you can optimize. So using something like Amazon Q to do this will kind of speed up that process. But John, do you want to kind of summarize what infrastructure as code is to kind of make sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to just sort of take a step back and talk about it from a high level, think about these as, your templates and, your recipe books for deploying infrastructure and setting configurations within your cloud infrastructure, right? So this even goes, a few layers beyond just being able to go through and define, the individual infrastructure components. We can use infrastructure as code to go through and set up things like, code pipelines or, individual configurations that we have within our infrastructure. But for having, repeatable deployments, we're going to be using infrastructure as code to do that. And then where we're using code, we get the benefits of things like versioning, where if I'm making a change and we have, a repository for any of our changes or version control systems, we can now apply that to our infrastructure as we go through to deploy it and trace back and see what types of changes we've made as, those new EC2 instances are becoming available or new offerings, be able to step back through, each version that we have of our templates that we're deploying.
Brilliant. And we've got a question, which is, what is your favorite IAC? I'll go. Mine used to be Terraform. That was like we used to use CloudFormation, we moved to Terraform. I do love Terraform, have a HashiCorp shirt that I wear a lot. But because I work here, I now started using CloudFormation again, and I've just, that's what I build in, because I feel like it's the thing I build in the most frequently. But I remember the power of Terraform being very cool. But what about you, John?
I think it's CDK. I mean, I used to, like you, use some other templates for going through and doing configurations, but having used CDK on a few different projects, and being able to take advantage of that for a couple different workloads and seeing the power there, I'm a fan. So it's really cool.
Love that. I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I've used it a bit, and I can see the power of it. Similar kind of with Terraform. But yeah, they're kind of the main ones that we see people use, those three. But let us know, chat, if you have any others. What's your favorite? Chat, let me know. What's everyone's favorite? What kind of things do you guys use? I want to see what the consensus is.
I see that last comment in there, the kind that creates itself. And I think that's part of it too. I like the CDK that's already created for me, where somebody else has already maybe done a lot of the work, and they're sharing what they've already built. I'm happy to kind of lean in on, what, a builder has already made available that, is working well for them.
Yeah, someone has also said Pulumi. Shout out Pulumi. We had someone from Pulumi on here a long time ago with Alex. So when it comes to optimizing, I feel like a lot of the times with FinOps people, we are reactive. We're out there looking for those idle resources. We're using the tools that Amazon gives us, like Cost Optimization Hub, which is amazing, to identify things that need to be changed. But John, why is it so important that we focus on the infrastructure as code and optimizing from there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a couple different reasons. One of them is, our shift left perspective, making sure that we're building efficiently, from the start, and we're deploying efficiently, as early as possible, so that we're not forced to go through and, implement corrective changes to running workloads. We want to be able to test these things, have this follow through the entire development life cycle as early as possible, and implementing, best practices as soon as we possibly can. As opposed to going through and just introducing changes, later on. But I think also this is like the power of infrastructure as code, is that everything is laid out for us in that recipe. And as these new capabilities are coming out, we can go through and implement them and do this a lot easier than having to do, corrective change down the road. So let's lean in on, the benefits of using infrastructure as code, and use it as an opportunity to go through and optimize, early and easily, to save money and do things more efficiently. I think we got you on mute there, Steph.
I'm muted. Yeah, I was having a drink. I don't want to hear my slurping. So we're after today's session, guys, when you go, if you are someone who builds infrastructure as code, or you work with someone who builds infrastructure as code, maybe use some of the ways that we do it today to just have a go and see what it finds. That will be very cool. And if you do, you know what you've got to do afterwards is you got to let me know what you find with cost optimization at amazon.com. Always love to know what you guys get up to and kind of share those stories. We're going to do a quick poll. So I want to know, have you guys used Amazon Q yet? I feel like a lot of people these days are using it more and more and more. So let us know kind of, have you guys done it yet? I always want to see kind of where people are. John, how often are you using Amazon Q?
I mean, at this point, it's probably daily. It's it's hard not to, and we'll share some of the ways that we're using it, as we walk through a few of the demos here. But I think if I'm at my desk and we're working on something, we're using Q in one way or another.
Perfect. And it looks like the consensus, everyone else has done that with the people doing it. With that, let's get into. Oh, we just had one person say no. Demo time. John, is there anything else we need to know before you want to jump into your kind of simple first level demo that you want to showcase?
Yeah, well, we can talk through it, as we kind of bring this up and share it. Maybe the one piece, for context here is that we're going to be using, the Q developer within VS Code. So just kind of a reminder for folks that, if you haven't used Q developer before in the past, there is a free tier offering, that has some few limitations behind like the pro version of it, the paid version, which is about, I think, $19 per user per month. But it's something that you can get started with, right away using that free tier. And I'll set the stage for our example here. Let me bring up my screen. Oops. Okay, cool. And what we're going to be using for this demonstration is one of the CDK templates that's available in the AWS samples GitHub repo.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you've got that link handy. We could share it out for
Yes.
folks because you can follow along and do exactly what I'm doing here in your own version, right? So all I did was I took this CDK template, and CDK can be shared in a number of different formats and different languages. I've got this as a TypeScript CDK example. When you look at the repo, you'll be able to navigate and find your favorite language and go through and look at the examples for that language. So if you like Go, you like Python, TypeScript, Java, whatever it is that you like, you can go through and take a look at those samples there. And we've got an application that's defined out in this CDK stack right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by having Q go ahead and give me some recommendations to optimize cost. So I've got a prompt that we have already created here, which is review the following CDK file and identify opportunities to change configurations/resources to optimize for cost efficiency. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And I want to call out a couple things in here as you go through and try to do this yourself. You want to make sure that when we're talking about optimization or efficiency, if your goal is cost optimization and cost efficiency, you could spell that out inside the prompt. Otherwise, there's a chance that you could be getting, recommendations around other areas of optimization, maybe that are outside of cost and, should be related back over, but just kind of a call out as you're going through and looking at it. And right out of the gate, it's going to start to give me some of those findings for cost optimization opportunities. And it's not implementing any of those yet. What it's doing is just giving me recommendations. So we'll go through and read through a few of the different examples. And the first one is talking about, instance type configuration, where, we're not specifying an instance type here. And this is introducing a risk that potentially we're going to choose a suboptimal instance type, something that's higher cost. And again, we want to be able to go through here and look at those recommendations and validate, what the right option is. But what it's doing is it's putting a couple of recommendations in here for burstable instances, ones that are a little bit smaller, and it's taking a guess at some of the details, on the workload that it doesn't know right now. That's a good example of some of the recommendations that we can get out of this. That I've seen myself personally, where we'll grab CDK or we'll grab infrastructure as code from a GitHub repo. Someone else created this project, a year or two ago, and now we want to go through and find recommendations for lower cost instance types, and it'll help us identify those opportunities and show us exactly where we have to revise the code to take advantage of those.
Yeah. And before you jump on, like it's kind of taking a best guess because we're just saying optimize it, right? So it will be looking, but it won't necessarily, it depends on what you have in there, like if it will know the type of workloads you need. But if, for example, you guys are using certain instance types because of commitments or because of requirements, you have to also let that know. So it might suggest that you can use T's when in fact you have been told that you should use M's. And this is the kind of things that you need to kind of layer into your prompts, or have things like customizations or relative information that you want to reuse every single time so that it's akin to what your company requires. So that's always the thing. It's going to go for the best case, what it thinks is the right answer. But if you have certain configuration choices that are a must, you gotta let it know.
Yeah, that's a good call out. And the same thing with, maybe prioritization. We're going to show an example a little bit later on, where we're doing more upfront prompting, but you can do some of that prompting here too when you're working with Q Developer and say, hey, this is a list of kind of my organization's, priorities. Maybe we always go with Graviton first with our instances. You can spell that out in the recommendations here and get more specific. We started with a pretty broad prompt that we put into Q, but you can obviously refine that and put some of your best practices in there.
Perfect. And there was a question which is M is ARM instance or Graviton? No, M is just a family. So you can, if you have a Graviton, it will be a G instance. So there'll be a G after the letter. For ARM, is there an A after it? I've just spaced.
I'm sorry, say that again.
If it's an instance type that has that's an ARM. Yeah, it's A, isn't it? Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
G.
AMD.
So we'll see A with the AMDs, yeah, and G with
Yeah.
our gravitons. And then there could be, an
Yeah.
additional, suffix if this is like network optimized, disk optimized, if we're looking,
Yes.
any of those additional ones. But again,
Yeah.
that's the great part about this, where maybe what you want to do is build like your standardized list of, instance types and be able to provide that context, into Q in order to, get even more specific about this.
Yeah, I dropped a link in for the different instance type documentation, so have a look for that. Okay, what else is it telling us to do, John?
Cool. So it's guiding something here on our a pipeline that is always enabled, and it's telling us, it might be a better idea to go through and schedule this to run only when needed to reduce, additional executions that we see happening here. So I think that's a good call out. And something else that you might want to do, when you're working with these, and we could do it in Q, or you can do this just looking at any of your infrastructure as code that you have, is have it go through and kind of summarize what the application is first, like describe the app to me so that I understand, what all the components are that make it up. A lot of times we'll go through and just deploy this and we can kind of see all the pieces and see how it's working, but there could be some kind of hidden elements in there that you might want to be aware of, even before you start this optimization.
Yeah.
I like
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say that asking, we did something the other day, which was like telling you, I have inherited this project. What does it do? How does it work? Explain it to me, is a really good way of getting it to lay out the process or the workflow of it. Because when you're looking at 500 lines of code, you might be like, I get the gist, but like, are there any intricacies? Like, how does it work? What's the workflow? So kind of get it to explain that for you, and it will give you that sense of something broken, or if you need to improve something, you can kind of know what the component parts of it are, which is very handy.
Yeah, and we've run into those issues before where, maybe you're using a CDK template that has a couple different options for how you're going to run the workload. And maybe it's spinning up a EC2 instance that is optional, and that's a component that you're not using. You might want to go through and, remove something like that. So always good. And especially if we take a look at, the length and the level of detail that we have in some of this CDK, it could be a lot to go through and kind of understand and process. It's syntax intensive, and really nice to be able to go through and have the LLM do that description for you so that, you're not guessing.
Yeah.
Now, I really like this call out here. This is around ECR lifecycle policies. So we're creating container images inside this this application. And what would happen by default is every time we go through and we do the build process, we're going to create a new image, if the image doesn't already exist, if we're changing the code at all, even if we're adding in, one character, adding in a comment, we're going to go through, rebuild it. And those container images are going to live inside ECR in the Elastic Container Registry. And they're going to continue to live in there indefinitely unless we go through and do what's being recommended here, adding lifecycle management to automatically clean up the old images. And a lot of times, we're not going to need to keep all of those in there because we can always redeploy. We can go back to the repo. We can generate, like a new image. So this is one we've seen a lot too, where we're building and building. We've got a lot of iterations, a lot of different commits. We end up with a lot of images. This is a nice call out to remind us that we can go through and put a retention parameter in here, so that we're only keeping the 5 most recent images. And of course, if we're going to go through rebuild from an older version or another commit that we had, we'll go through and do that, but it'll just do a rebuild at the time. We don't need to hold on to all the images in the ECR.
That is, I didn't even know that was a thing. This is what I mean about the queue. Like, I wouldn't know, and I don't. Again, I work in CDK, so for me, this is very handy. The to kind of track these things, and you could always ask it, like, "What is this? Tell me more about this." Subnet configuration. What?
Yeah, let's see what it's doing here.
Do you want to pull the box out a little bit, John? So
yeah,
it's a bit easier for you to read.
Slide this over so it's not inside of a postage stamp for us here.
Yeah.
Added a subnet specification to use cheaper availability zones or private subnets. This is one where
a bit interesting.
Specify a cost-effective subnet that it's asking us to use. And we could see here that it's actually putting a placeholder in. So this is a case where it's recommending, a change to the networking infrastructure, but it's asking us to, provide in some of those additional inputs. So use private subnets to avoid NAT gateway costs if possible.
Interesting. Okay, that is very clever. I was like, what does it mean an optimized subnet? Because if you said that to me normally, I'd be like, that's not a thing. You can't have a price difference on a subnet. But it's saying, hey, when you're thinking about the bigger picture of networking to avoid these things, that is very cool. I mean, maybe we could circle back to that one and get it to like help me build that. That might be quite an interesting thing to dive back into. Like, what does it look like to change it so that the infrastructure is that? Is there any infrastructure in this CDK?
There, yeah, there will be some infrastructure. I think we have a either it's either
sorry,
ECS.
I meant networking, not infrastructure.
Oh, networking infrastructure. Yeah, so I haven't deployed this one. So we don't have anything running. We don't have an account that this lives inside of. It would just be illustrative. But good call out for some of these recommendations, so that one, we're not putting something in that's going to break the deployment. We can always tell it, hey, go through and implement maybe recommendations 1 and 2. And then for additional ones, I want you to add those as a comment block at the bottom. And we'll talk a little bit later about like some other like kind of think big ideas around this, where we've got folks in the team who have helped customers with other types of like automated pull requests, things like that, where maybe what you want to do is create a pull request for some of the recommendations that are a little bit lighter lift, fewer tech considerations. And then, in the comments for all of that, describe what's being implemented and note that there's additional details that are either put in with commenting, or we're going to take those and kind of break those out and store those in like someplace else. That's a notification that goes to the developer to evaluate, and they can just look at this, and maybe the team is going to be able to say, hey, this is actually, not applicable at all. I know where they're coming from, but
And Pete's asked, can you ask Q to elaborate on the subnet configuration cost for us?
Yeah, well, let's go through and do that. We'll take a look at these last two and see if there was one more. There was one more when I ran this earlier that I wanted to call out.
Classic. Never assume it's going to bring it back up. As anyone who watched the email episode where we make the automated email using Q, it's very funny.
Yeah, and that's where being more prescriptive is going to help you get more repetitive or more consistent responses back. So if we had specific areas to investigate, this is a particularly broad, template that we're looking at here. If we're more prescriptive with that, like input prompt, we'll be able to get more consistency out. But we kind of intentionally started this broad, and we've got a pretty broad, template that we have here. And we'll get into some more examples a little bit later on of how you can get more specific with that as well. The other example that I saw before that I'm not seeing here now was a call out around terminating instances that were failing, right? So if we're creating instances, but the deployment's not working, going through and having, automated cleanup, that we could set as a parameter would be, another good one for us to put in. But let's go ahead and we'll take Pete's question. We'll put this in here. Say,
I'm intrigued, but Q will find things sometimes and find things different like other times. So always run it. I feel like you don't have to run it twice, but kind of tell it found these things before, like are there new ones, or if you're interested in a certain area of your files, kind of pinpoint it to that specific location. All right. And we have a question on this, but we'll come to it in. Actually, we can bring it up now while it's working. So, why do you have to do this? It's not common sense to use private subnets, especially if you can edit this file, create subnets. Also makes sense to know to choose subnets. So, I mean, it depends on your infrastructure whether it is like relative to have those private subnets. But again, a queue is like guessing on this. Maybe it doesn't work like John said for your situation, but it's kind of take an estimated guess. But anything you else want to add on that, John?
I think just, it's an illustrative example, right? That's a good call out, right? It's a good call out that, ultimately knowing the workload and knowing, some of the design decisions is going to be the most critical piece here. And I think that kind of presents the second piece here. We're talking about, using Q to identify opportunities and potentially implement them. There's another way to do this too, is using it just to kind of create reporting off of it, where maybe I'm going to use that to just understand like common patterns across like CDK. So like if I'm a developer persona and I want to use this to help me move a little bit faster, identify like new areas of opportunity, make life a little easier, that's one thing. But maybe I just want to do this kind of like in a dry run format, and I want
Mhm.
to collect a list of like all the types of recommendations that are generally coming up. Maybe half of those are ones that are not really applicable, and then maybe like another subset of those are patterns that I want to focus on, building some governance around, or building processes around to help folks, do that a little bit easier.
Yeah, and Pete's put common sense isn't common, which is very true. The other thing I would say on this is, like John mentioned, like a dry run. One thing that you want to be careful with is if you just said optimize my entire code base, right, and you have tons of files and it's very complex, you will lose track of what it's done. Obviously, you can use Git to kind of commit between the two, but for your understanding, what I think is a good way of doing it is kind of like John's saying, is tell me what is there to change, and then ask me what I should ask me for which ones I want, and then make the changes, but have like a tracking information about what changes it's made, because you don't want this to run away from you so that you don't understand what's happened. Because I have had that and it has become stressful because you're like, it's breaking. Where is it breaking? There's all these things, when in reality, you just need to know one thing at a time, like you would like a junior member of staff, is kind of explain these things, break it up into sequence so that you know what they've actually done. But what's it said about the, oh, sorry, go on, John.
Well, I was going to go into these details here, right? So I think the first
Yeah.
one, to call out, or one of the good examples that we have here is around like public IP charges. And what I'm thinking about with this is maybe I would modify this CDK to take a like a build parameter from whatever my build job is that defines the stage that I'm deploying this in. And maybe I would want to modify this for like production versus like a non-prod example. And I would want to use QDeveloper to add in some of those conditional details to modify how the deployment is going to look, depending on what stage I'm deploying it in. So maybe, yes, I'm going to use public facing public IPs for my production deployment, but I want to actually go through and maybe do something for private subnets if I'm going to be deploying, in a beta stage or non-prod, something like that. So those can be other, I think helpful scenarios to think about. Is like there's work involved with doing that stuff sometimes, or maybe I'm adapting CDK from a different use case to my own use case, and you want to go through and think about, some of those types of details. It can be a helpful tool for just making a lot of that stuff easier.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Anything else you want to show in your demo before we swap over?
I was going to say, let's go through and please implement only the EC2 instance changes and add inline comments.
Comments. I don't know about you guys, but I used to, at the start of project, write loads of comments and be like, kind of keep all detail. And then as you build and build, I would just forget to do it. Or even like a README, getting it to write documentation. Someone said to me recently, AI is a perfect solution for writing READMEs. Because not only that, for someone else to read the README, another AI that someone's using, another queue or whatever, can use the README to understand what's going on. And so it can just be keeping track. So it's not just making a guess as we do it. Also, chat, as if everyone's joined kind of partway through, we are optimizing infrastructure as code using Amazon Q. Please feel free to drop any comments, questions into the chat as we go. So what changes it made?
So it put in our instance type selection here, but I think the cool part that I want to call out was, where it puts in this cost optimization comment line. This will help us go through, just identify where those changes are taking place. Why was this put in? Especially if I'm going to share this with somebody else, maybe they're going to do a diff back over to the CDK and like want to find all the optimization recommendations and see if any of those are applicable. It's just a cool way to go through and do that, and make it really simple to identify some of those patterns and opportunities without being an expert in all the syntax for this template.
Great. Okay. Anything else on this, or should we swap over?
Let's go to the next one. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we do, someone's put, I'm terrible at commenting. I now see it as a job preservation. If I only remember why I did things then. I totally understand what you mean. Like build it secretly so no one understands what they're doing. So what we're going to do is swap on over to mine. So I wanted to jump through a couple of bits to show you guys. But before I do, I want to know from everybody, what is the thing that you hate or you think is the most annoying to tell people when it comes to optimizing infrastructure as code. So GP2 to GP3, Graviton for managed services, CloudWatch retention. Put the number in the chat, and that's how we'll see what the process is. John, what would you put as your one? What do you find the most annoying, or like little thing that you're always like, I wish people did more of this to make sure that they optimize their infrastructure?
Maybe life cycle policies. I mean, there's just, a lot of different kind of like inputs and configurations there. And it's usually like in the back of my mind, but like an S3 life cycle policy. And this is really nice to be able to say, if I'm using S3, make sure there's a life cycle policy in there for, all those important details.
Yeah, get rid of those. Include multiple uploads are a big one of mine. Yes, people are agreeing GP3 is a big one. Mine is CloudWatch, as most of you know. I've done a lot of content on CloudWatch, and so I love doing it. That's my kind of one. So the thing I wanted to do, let's take this down. So what I wanted to do is go through kind of a couple of little bits for optimizing in a different format. So there's the way that John's kind of do it in a just kind of analyze my code. You can be a bit more specific with it. And so let's bring up my screen. So what I have here is a bunch of infrastructure as code. It's actually from a repo, which is unoptimized infrastructure as code. So there's meant to be a lot of bugs in here. And I can just go into my chat and start asking, or a kind of quicker way that you could do it. If I click on one of my workloads, so I've just clicked on one of my files, I can right click, ask Q, and tell it to optimize. And this is if you want to focus on like a specific part of your code. So let's see what it's done. So I'll look at my CloudFormation template, and it's going to optimize for better performance, security, and maintainability. So not just necessarily cost, but across lots of different elements of it. Especially, we should always be caring about FinOps. Oh, it's trying again. So we're going to let it do, give it action to make this new folder for me and start kind of running some optimization opportunities. So I think this one will actually just make an check the optimization one very quickly and see what it does. So it's going to make me a new version. So let's see what it does. So replace put metrics. So this is where you see I'm getting security optimizations, right? So it's using a role, remove log permissions, covered by basic role. Okay, good. So it's kind of taken away duplicate efforts that could have the gaps, reduced memory for performance. So I've got it to a huge memory that I don't need to do it for the amount of code I had, sufficient for logging and timeout time limitations. So it's done all this stuff that I didn't know, and it's upgraded. I don't know if you've seen this, John, that Python 3.9 is no longer supported by AWS. Have you seen that email?
No, I hadn't seen that.
I think I have a lot of historical lambdas in my accounts, and so every so often I'm flooded with like, you need to upgrade your Python. So everyone go out there, upgrade your Python. And that wasn't even like, this has cost implications to improve it, but that's just performance. And then enable a log group with infrequent access. We love to see some CloudWatch optimization, configuration for retention, reduce excessive logging. So there's loads of stuff that it's done in this, where I just kind of clicked on this one file and clicked optimize. So you don't even need to do like a heavy prompt. And that's already done it for me. If me personally, I would never even think for security, because as we know, I'm a cost person. That's why I haven't guessed on any of the security shows they're on this channel. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for wherever you're watching to see those security shows, to learn from experts better than me. But this gives you like a well-rounded optimization. Have you done it that way before, John? Have you tried that?
No, I'm learning right along with the audience, so this is cool.
Yeah, it's a fun way of doing it. There's a bunch of other things you can do in the queue. So there's explain, refactor, fix if something's wrong, generate some tests, or you can just send to prompt. So if you're using the chat window, which is on the left-hand side, or if I'm doing inline chat, so if I'm using it, it will come up here. But just these like inbuilt, like explain, like John was saying, if you want it to explain something to you, it kind of goes through and explains all these elements and what it does. So I just like the fact that these are inbuilt as a quick way. So even if you're worried about like, what do I do prompt wise? How do I do it? It's just kind of going in there and finding it. So let's have a look at something else. John, what should we click on? Let's see what we've got in here. We've got lots of different services. Oh, we do have an AI one. I feel like AI is a good one to optimize.
Let's see. I'm curious.
Okay, so this is so we're to process. So imagine you're a FinOps person, and this could be something that people with FinOps do. I would love to see this as a thing that happens where like you go through, you get these repos, have a play around, see if you can get access, and we take this code and we'll say, okay, this is an app that someone's made. Give me a description. Okay, very bad description. So let's explain it. Let's use Q to explain what this thing does and see what it comes back with. Just this. I love when it pauses at a random phrasing and you're like, it's like if you pause someone on a video on this thing. Yeah. So it's gone through and kind of, okay, so it's done some interesting thing. Can you explain more about what the app does? Let's see if it figures it out. So what it actually does is it creates a little AI chatbot. So yeah, this was a demonstration on the free tier show that we did recently. So it makes like it uses these different models and things like that. So let's kind of see if we can get it to optimize. Let's optimize this AI chat. I want to see what it does. See if it finds anything massive. I'm always like concerned if it works as well. Chat, let us know any comments or if there's any services on that list that you saw. If I bring it back up, we have CloudTrail, we have EC2, we have EFS, we have Lambda, we have S3. Let me know in the chat what would someone like me to draw into and see what it comes up with optimization opportunities.
I'm also curious if the chat, if anyone's using any tools to do this today, or mostly manual processes. How do you all kind of go through and revisit, any of these templates for optimization as like workloads evolve and new stuff comes out?
Yeah, that is a really good question, because these days I feel like people are probably better at doing it and they have more things in GitHub that are preventing it. But as, for example, that like 3.9 Python supporting for Lambda, that is something that you guys should be alerted by. I get an email directly to my email because it's an account I've set up with my email internally. But if you have these big organizations that have a email that goes to like some kind of mailbox, you're not getting it, you might not even know that there's an issue with this. So how are you keeping up to date with that kind of thing? Let's see. This is my guess is a bot. There's a great documentation from what I see. However, I have myself not used a bot. So now's your opportunity. Go and kind of try this out. So what's it seen? So cost and performance, instead of using Aurora, it suggests that you use Dynamo for some architecture elements. Let's see if it does anything to do with security, usage. So it's just give me some higher level bits. Oh, it's some security elements with my Bedrock. The one thing I wonder if it did, let me see if it's in here, if I have the right one.
And this is where I'd be interested, and maybe seeing, if there's a way to, maybe it's in the prompt, give it like more context on the workload. What's the expected scale of this? Are we deploying this for like functional testing? Are we deploying this for like production level scale where it's going to grow and grow? Because those decisions, right? Like, as we talked about before, it's not going to have all that context in there to, align best practices for like what the future of the workload is going to look like.
Yeah. So the last one I was going to choose was a managed service. So my RDS one. What I'll do is we'll keep this one open. I want to move to Graviton for this RDS. How do I do that? Can I do that? That is the question I feel like people ask a lot. They're not really sure how to migrate, especially in a managed service. It's really simple. So it tells us, yes, you can move to Graviton. It's already checked it. This is how you do it. So it's going to make the change. It's going to change it to R6G, and then upgraded my storage as well to give more performance and explain like the benefits of it. Now, the thing I will remind people is, like, this is good as well. It gives you the migration process. So back up your data, update the stack, and no application code changes requirement. That is the best thing with RDS. We don't need to change anything with Graviton for managed services. We don't need to change any application issues. The one thing I will say when it comes to Graviton is I see this a lot where people just update their infrastructure as code, they push it, and they think, oh, it's okay. I have a maintenance window. It will just do the change in the maintenance window, and then they see it happening. So if you do require, for any kind of reason, to do a change like this in a maintenance window, I would do it in the console and change it, and then deploy your infrastructure as code after it, so it catches up with the drift. So that means you don't have to risk an immediate change with this kind of a thing. Okay. Any questions, comments, please drop them into the chat. But we'll move on to our last section, which is the cool thing that John has built up for us. John, do you want to give some context before we move into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're prepping for the show. We're talking about, going through, using Q and using, AI to optimize infrastructure as code. And kind of naturally, we think about this from like a developer standpoint or like, ourselves. But, I was thinking about it a little bit from like the FinOps, side of things. Like what if we're looking at it from more of like a central perspective, and mentioned that, some folks in the team have kind of been able to work with customers on, some of these org-wide rollouts. So wanted to, put our thinking caps on and think about, maybe zooming out a little bit and how would we use these capabilities more at scale? And our goal here is just to kind of have fun and, maybe plant some seeds around different use cases for this outside of just that inline, code correction kind of as we're working. So I'm going to bring up a demo here, and what the demo is designed to do is scan through a whole group of CDK files, do a couple of things. It's going to take in a kind of environment specific configuration file that defines like what my org's best practices are. Like what are the important parts for us? What do we do? What don't we do? Do we have things like a standard retention window for like our lifecycle policies or backups that we're creating? We saw some of the responses that, Steph got back on the screen. I did too, where, it's recommending, certain retention windows, but it's not going to know what our organization standards are. Where if we can pass that through as part of a batch process, it's going to help to update and standardize all the CDK or all of our infrastructure as code based on kind of like a common set of rules. And then once it goes through and does that, it's going to provide some of that summarization in batch. So I can look across this like fleet of workloads and say, hey, well, what do I have out there today? What are the optimization patterns? And then it's going to take all the information that it gathers looking at the CDK code. It's going to give us a consolidated roll up, like what are the patterns that are happening across the organization that, maybe they do get, addressed with CDK changes, governance changes, but maybe it's something else that, we have to do in order to address it, right? Like, education, enablement, cultural elements. So I'll talk for a bit. Let me go through and I'll kind of show folks how it works. And I'm kind of curious if anyone has any other ideas on how they might use something like this in their environment.
Yeah. All right. Whenever you're ready, go for it.
We spend so much time talking that I'm not getting my screen up here. Can you see that one now?
Yeah. Before you jump into the demo, one thing that I love, like the mention of the configuration file based on your environment, things like dev and prod and stuff, is I'll always shout out because I feel like people forget, is things like multi-AZ on RDS. It really adds a lot to your costs, and in development environments, when you're just kind of building, you don't need that. And so I love to kind of just shout that out as like a little extra nugget. If anyone's doing dev, like go check that. Like, are you needing to do the multi-AZ? Maybe when you're getting into like testing, but as you're developing, probably don't need it, so go save some money there. But yeah, show us what you've got. I love that you always have this, like you did it in the keys one we did the little like vibe coding episode where you have like cool
you gotta always
branding.
Offload your ASCII art to Q developer and have it go
What's
through
it called?
and make things pretty. This is the like old school like ASCII art that we used to see in like text files back in early 2000s, late 90s, dating myself. But yeah, so this is my infrastructure as code optimizer. And I made this yesterday with Q Developer. So went through and kind of created that product requirements document, described what I wanted to do. And there's a lot happening under the hood here. But we'll kind of kick this off and then we'll show some of those files as we walk through. But what this is going to do is batch analyze, CDK files. So a lot of different ways that we could pull all that information out. Folks may have seen like MCPs becoming available for some of these version control platforms. So you have an MCP that reaches back out to GitHub and pulls all the, the infrastructure as code templates that you have, or you could go through and just run a command against it, pull all your infrastructure as code files based on like an extension, but get those all into a bucket. And then it's going to use my configuration file that defines my org standards. And it's going to help me go through and implement those. So it found 5 different CDK files here. I grabbed these all just from the AWS samples library. So 5 TypeScript-based CDK. We're going to say yes, go through, optimize it. And it will go through one at a time, and it's going to do a few different things here. It's going to first analyze and figure out what the workload is and give me a report on that, so I know what's out there. What are these applications? What are they doing? Second thing that it's going to go through and do is actually create a new revised version of the CDK that is going to have those recommendations implemented into them. And it's going to add inline comments that flag them as coming from our optimization bot.
Oh.
And then the third thing that it's going to do is give me this list right here of optimization recommendations. So it's telling us that this is a workload that has an S3 bucket that stores our widgets. There's a Lambda function handler. There's API gateway with REST API that's doing some CRUD stuff. And the service runs on Node, and it gives us the version that we have. And it's giving us a few different things that it found here. It's going to recommend that we implement, ARM64 and Graviton. It's going to implement S3 lifecycle rules, which is something that I put in my kind of definition configuration file.
Mm-hmm.
What are my standard retentions? When do I expire? When do I archive? It's going to enable S3 versioning, which is, again, something that I called out in my config file. And then, I put some throttling limits in here to control costs. Then it also called out these operational recommendations. So these are things that might not live inside the infrastructure as code, but compute savings plans. Are you using those, to reduce cost? Do you have monitoring and logging mechanisms that are going to be implemented? Do you have testing strategies, and are you continuing to audit the efficiency with your FinOps practices? So those could look different depending on what the workload is. And if we scroll down and look at our next one, this is an ECS cluster running on EC2 with a single task. And then it has an ALB that's running there, and it's using T3 micro instances, and just kind of helps us understand what's going on, but has different call outs that we have, down below for both the optimization recommendations and then the operational recommendations.
Nice. Oh wow, this is that for each one of the files has their own.
Yeah, so this will do it for each one of the files, and once this last one finishes, I'm going to go through and tell it to create our consolidated report, and I'll show you all what that is going to look like for us here. So finished up my 5th app, went through, did all the optimizations for it. It's asking me if I want a consolidated summary of all the findings across the organization, or within my workloads that I own. I'm going to say yep. Go through, give us this consolidated analysis, and let me go through and jump over to some of those artifacts so we can see what it found for us.
Oh, dive it in. While you're doing that, there you go. Oh.
Go ahead, though, Steph. What?
No, go for it. Don't worry.
Okay, so let's look at this. This is my this is one of the CDK files that it produced for us. And again, it added these inline comments for us, and it put this in a separate directory. But again, we could use our imagination. Maybe I would want to create a pull request, and I would also want to take the summaries and put that detail in there so the developer can see what are the changes that are being implemented, kind of at a high level, earn some trust with them, and then get them to, further evaluate which one of these they want to actually merge in. But it's saying, optimization bot, we added lifecycle rules and versioning per your requirements. So this is something specific that we defined, as being important to us. And then we go through and we have this, kind of batch summary that's showing us, okay, we analyzed 5 different workloads. Here's the first one. Here's kind of the roll up of all the findings that we had. So I can skim through this and kind of get a report on what's the state of all my workloads, what of all my infrastructure as code that I have out there, what are kind of the key findings? And of course, I can go through and I can look at these and kind of interpret it myself. But again, power of AI, we're going to go through and get this nice consolidated summary of what is happening kind of at broad scale throughout the environment. It's recommending, that we implement ARM64 Graviton instances across multiple services. It's talking about, implementing Spot for Fargate workloads, data storage and data management, lifecycle stuff. And then we gave it a prompt at the end that was asking us kind of where to prioritize and what other details are there to think about. And it's recommending, make sure we're using Compute Optimizer and Cost Explorer for all these things. So we can, tell it to get as detailed as we want, for creating these roll-ups. But you can think about this as maybe you want to go through and do more of a dry run evaluation at scale. And that could be a cool way to find out some interesting things about the environment.
Do you have the configuration file to hand of what you?
Yeah. You want to take a look at it? Yeah. And this is pretty lightweight. Let me go through and bring this up.
Give him a sec. So many files. And this isn't even like, we haven't even got full input like architectures going on with this. We're coming up to the last kind of 5 minutes here. So any other questions, please let us know in the chat. So what have you got? Okay.
So it made a YAML-based file for us. This could just be natural language text, though. Pretty flexible in how we do this, and we're just injecting this, with the CDK code when we pass it over to, in this case, Q Business. And the reason why we're using Q Business for this is we created an application that's basically a RAG database, and in addition to like being able to put in organizational specific stuff, we've loaded this one with, thousands of optimization artifacts, things like the transcripts from this very, Twitch stream. Got hundreds of those transcripts in there to help give even more context beyond what Q Developer would do on its own. But we have a few things in here. Yes, we want to use Graviton. Let's make sure all of our lambdas are set to ARM64. We have, some of the retention details that are laid out here for things like, snapshot retention, lifecycle policies. We want to archive after 90 days, expire after a year, use versioning. And then one we didn't really get to look at, but like CloudFront, let's use the price class 100, which is going to be, fewer points of presence, but lower cost for us to be able to run and operate, content delivery. But you can use your imagination again and think about like, what are the patterns that are important to your org? And what are the pieces that you'd want to emphasize in doing any of the infrastructure as code optimization? And then let Q go through and do the rest for you.
Yeah, and like adding these things, like this is a really, really cool element. And I think we're like things like configurations on Amazon Q is a way that you could do this in the dev side. When you've done it in the business side, sorry, professional. What do you mean by that? Were you in the UI to do it, or how did you make it that way?
Yeah. So we inside the console, we have the option to create an application for Q Business, and this is going to be similar to what you could do with Bedrock, with creating a knowledge base. These are essentially going to be like RAG databases full of all of our artifacts that we're going to use for retrieval augmented generation. So what's the extra stuff, extra context that we want to be able to do? And when we go through and we have this configured, I'll bring the code up for our application right here. When we make our calls, let's see, we've got them in here someplace. We're going to say that, this is it right here. So we're going to call Amazon Q. We're going to pass through, all of our data when we're telling it to optimize the CDK. We're using this retrieval mode. So we're saying, hey, use the RAG data set, as kind of the first line of information when you're going through and doing optimization. So we want to use the truths that you speak on the show, Steph, as like our first line of recommendations for anything that we're going to see in the CDK. And you can imagine that maybe, for your organization, you have some very specific, very like kind of nuanced details that you want to be mindful of. You could put those in there. You could have that kind of context. And then we're just pointing to that specific application, which is the RAG data set, right here in the application ID. But if you scroll through, you'll be able to see in here some of the prompts that we have laid out. See if we can find, there's a pretty art. Yeah, very pretty, very nice.
Someone's even put yes aside.
Yeah.
I got up in the 70s. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. And we're giving it this detail here on like, we want you to pay attention to, this is our summary, our roll up of all of our analyses when we're doing the consolidated report. Be specific, act as a cloud efficiency expert, call out, those governance and operational improvements that are tied back over, that maybe we're not seeing in the CDK. And then this is where we'll get that response back. So we're going to package all this stuff up, give it to the LLM, we'll get a response back. and then we'll be able to store that and look through for those reports.
Brilliant. Okay, we're coming up to the end now. We're going to do Richard's summary in just a second. A couple of things I wanted to highlight. If you wanted to learn a little bit more about Amazon Q, we have one more episode left of our live stream series on Amazon Q. So head on over to this page, or if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can get the link from my feed. Or we also have this Builder Center page, which has all the links to historical episodes that you can check out in here. We'll drop the link in the chat, or if you're watching on demand, underneath. So it has all the past episodes. With that, I would recommend checking out this Skills Builder course, which has a lot of really cool, all the stuff we went through. There's a lot of really cool elements to it, like setting up Q and the software development. All this stuff can be applied to optimization. Finally, if you haven't already, what are you doing? Make sure that you join the AWS Customer Acceleration team. That is the team that John and I are in, and we share all the awesome stories and builds that we have in there. So make sure that you join that channel to stay up to date with all of our kind of interesting stories. With that, let's hand it over to Secret Richard. So Richard listens to every one of our episodes, summarizes them, and then has a little fun note at the end. He is not AI. I was about to say, unfortunately, I don't mean unfortunately. He's not AI, even though people ask if he is. And I never see the prep beforehand, so I'll just see it and read it out, which could be a fun challenge for me. So let's break that up. And let's see. Optimizing IAC will reduce issues down to the line. Oh, okay. Implement CDK and leverage Q Developer for free. Analyze workflows to provide optimization recommendations, and central perspectives taken to identity organizational trends. He has sneakily put IAC in the letters at the start, which I love when he gets creative. So that is it from us. Thank you so much all for joining. Next week, we're going to be diving into the new pricing calculator aspects that have been released recently. So make sure that you join us then. And if not, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks. Bye.